Hi, I want to take you through a movement with my client here, Jarrett. So I want to look at the difference between a trainer that knows and a trainer that doesn't really know. So we're looking here at sort of a movement that involves squatting, but the effects of adding a rotation with a medicine ball into that squat to try and improve the motion or not improve the motion or change the motion in some way, depending on what you want to do. And so I want to take you through and show you the effects of this movement and sort of give you an idea of what it would look like if you knew how to use a HMAC. So if we just watch Jarrett squat. Now a HMAC is our way of teaching you to track movement. So this is an athletic guy, obviously, but as we look at the squat, look, the ball twists, and he comes out, so the ball twists as he drops distance on the squat, and then if you follow it through, he comes through, look, and goes the other way. So I'm not really interested in symmetry, and if you look at the blog post or the comments below in YouTube, then you'll see that there's plenty of research that says that's not really the important component here. But what I'm interested in is how this sort of athlete handles this rotation motion and what it does and what that could teach us. So in a normal squat, what I'd expect to happen is I'd expect the femurs to rotate out initially, both sides equally, and then I'd expect that to create a reaction at the knee that would allow both knees to start to bend. I'd expect that to mean at the ankles we'd see a stiffening, so I wouldn't see much dorsiflexion. Now I've got clients who start with their feet externally rotated, and when you see a foot that's externally rotated in that start point, then maybe you do see some motion at foot and ankle as well. Usually it's in the midfoot, but it can come from the foot and ankle. Now in a squat like this, I'd expect the first point to be here in this femur, and then you'd see a collapse at the knee, a move at the hip, and then eventually you'd see some movement at the foot. And at that foot, what you'd see is you'd see a collapsing in. And the collapsing in is a good thing. It'd be a last minute thing. Hopefully it'd be part of like a movement of tissue that should cause a reaction up in the hips, which should help combined with an almost immediate plantar flexion to allow the client to get back out of the squat. So you sort of see some things there. You'd see nothing here, but you'd look, and you'd see movement here, and that would be sort of the combination of motions you want to see. Now, what we've done in this scenario is we've said, right, well that's all well and good, but what happens when we put this rotation in? Now I've seen some rotations on the internet, so it must be true, and what the rotations have been, you've seen a whole body rotation. What you've not seen is this sort of like movement in segments from one component to another. So what I'm expecting here is that the instruction is, can I see a squat with rotation? Now what I kind of want to see is that we see this movement down, but at the same time we see this movement of the ball come across. So I'm potentially seeing the shoulders drive the pelvis. However, what I might see is I might see the pelvis drive the shoulders to allow the arms to move across. And so that would all be fine, because the goal is to get the ball from this point over to this point where we watch the body travel down in space. And so that's our sort of end goal. Okay, so if we track this movement then, and we just watch the motion, you can see that there's sort of a pre-anticipation of a turn that happens almost whole body. So we do see, if you start to watch, I think it happens a little, it should happen a little more so here, but you see here too, if you watch these femurs, look, just as we start to go, ignoring the top part of the body, you'll see both femurs start to travel out, and so there's definitely more on this side, but they both start to travel out, and that's to allow that knee bend. Now you'll see as the turn happens, we get more dorsiflexion here, whereas this ankle behaves a little more like a normal squat. And when I say normal's relative to you obviously, but it behaves a bit more like a squat you might see in an Olympic lift. If you could cover 2/3 of the body, that's what you'd see. Whereas this seems to be on a route of its own, so you see the knee travelling forward and around, and by knee I'm talking about you see the point of the kneecap travelling forward and around, and that creates an interesting scenario at the foot. So you start to see a dorsiflexion down in that ankle, and then you start to see a weight shift. So we've seen a weight shift this way, so the weight now is sat on this foot. We see that we're kind of keeping an arch under that foot, but this foot's flattening at the arch. And so as we watch this happen, initially we see a kind of a hip turning out. So I'll pull this back up, look. What we see like almost the pelvis is dropping over. But there is a turn of the thoracic, but it's not really affecting the lumbar. So you could almost draw a line at this point and say, well, you know, the rotation ain't as much as you'd think. And so then it starts to kick in as the weight kicks onto that leg, and that allows for more of sort of a reach of the ball and quite a deep squat. And what you'll see is the depth of the squat on this side is better than the depth of the squat on that side at this point. So it's almost like there's sort of like a tilt going on. The ankle's not involved. So if we were starting to play with the motion, you know, we'd say, well, there's a tilt going on for certain there, and there's an arched ankle and a sort of flat foot, an arched foot and a flat foot there. So there's more knee bend here and less knee bend there, and the weight's shifting this way. Now, at the same time as that's happening, initially the arms took up the motion, and then the shoulders, and then the hips got involved to turn that ball into the position that it's at. And that's what we're looking at. And obviously in this scenario, the eye's tracked. I think they're just for fun. The eye's tracked as the motion moved across. And so that's the descent. And then from that position, from that descent, the ball's brought back in, and then that left hip kind of powers through, and that right stays as a stabilizer until you start to get up towards the top, look, and then they both come through like with a hip thrust, which is interesting, right? So the question has to be, how is this useful? Now, where this is useful is if you have a client that squats, and as they squat, what you see is one knee bends more than the other. And so that ends up with a tilt of the pelvis and a movement of weight shift across the body. So if you see that, then this gives you a strategy to stop that. So in a straight squat, you might think in a straight squat, well, you know, why would I want to stop that? That's what I'm happy with. But if you did decide you wanted to sort of run a straight squat, I know my drawing's not that straight, but if you did want to keep that squat straight and you saw that someone was heading over this way, then what you might want to do is put a rotation in this way to send them this side. But even more, what if someone showed in standing that they had a flat foot and they had an arched foot, and you thought that was contributing to them not performing the squat that you want? And that's important. I'm not saying that you have the perfect squat in your arsenal, but I'm saying that you might want this straight squat because it might make more sense to someone who's going to be then translating this to a barbell squat to be able to feel what it feels like to be able to squat with a sort of a more equilibrium that's left and right. Now, I think that's an important thing to know, and so if that's a competition, that might be vitally important. If the client's ability to get to the floor is important, that might be important. If there's a previous injury, so a previous injury can cause an imbalance in a motion. Now, that imbalance is not necessarily something that you can put back, because to put an imbalance back suggests you know that what they look like when they were balanced, which is something that we don't really know. They might naturally move left or right in their most balanced state, but for competition they might need to be straight, or just to lift more biomechanically you might believe they want to be straight. Not wanting to go into that debate, what I'd say is if you think the cause is one foot's flat and one foot's arched, by having a slight rotation in the pelvis over rotating right, you'll flatten slightly this foot, but you'll arch slightly this foot. And what you might want to play with is how far you let the ball go, or do you pre-position the ball. And so that pre-positional movement of the ball can change where the centre of gravity is, and that centre of gravity can then shift how the foot reacts, and that could allow the client to feel what it feels like to squat with something more balanced or more symmetrical, and that might then carry over to the client choosing something a little more symmetrical. Obviously you could go the other way and you could highlight a bad pattern, and I say bad pattern, I mean relative to the pattern you want. I don't mean it's going to cause an injury, I don't mean it's going to change performance, just you want to highlight that they're using a pattern or behavior or a habit in motion that you'd like to see change, or you'd like to see them do the opposite. Well, one solution is to give them a motion that will balance them, and another solution is to make it ridiculously unbalanced. And so you might say, well, I noticed that this foot on the client's left arches and this foot on the client's right flattens, but I'm really going to massively over exaggerate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the ball massively over this way. I'm going to hope that the body, although it likes one of the positions, thinks too far is too much and rebels by trying a different technique to buy range. Now, bearing in mind that we're really what we're talking about here is central nervous system, we're talking about skill, and what we're not talking about here is stretching tissue, fascia, anything else. The movement changes because of the change in center of gravity. That changes how the muscles react. That's a slight different play on the skill set they already have. It's the movement of center of gravity, and then the looseness of the bones against each other in the joints, if there's any looseness at all, will then cause that reaction that some people will say, oh well, we're stretching this posterior something or lateral something, but actually you're just shifting the center of gravity, and the body reacts in a clever and skilled manner to handle this. You're then creating the environment you want to create the squat you want, and that's your goal with this motion. Now, if you're a trainer that really wants to see this motion, you really need to develop something that I call the HMAC eyes. So if you imagine I could give you a pair of glasses that helps you see this, then they'd be called our HMAC eyes or our HMAC glasses. Now, looking at a movement through HMAC glasses requires you to start describing things in a more complicated way, even though the end result is a more accurate hands-on or hands-off pattern and movement to make these things come together. So what you talk about here is you talk about, well, in the body, although there's lots of things happening and there's lots of orders happening, the reality is the thing you can see best are bones. That whether you like it or not and you want to get into muscles or not, the thing you can actually see are bones and bones moving. So what we talk about is, well, if you look at a movement, the first thing is there's a goal, and so the first thing is there's a goal, And then once you have a goal, then there's some sort of pre-movement conditioning, and then followed by the pre-movement conditioning, there's something concentric potentially happens. And then when there's something concentric happens, plus whatever else changes you need in the body to initiate the movement, then what happens is the initial movement, which is based around a skill where you've selected a bunch of movements at brain level, the spine's now executing these movements. What happens is, as soon as you start moving, bones move. And so now as bones move, the central nervous system, through the proprioceptive system, through the measurement of movement in skin, the measurement of movement in joints, in muscles, plus the feedback sort of that's auditory and visual and based on knowledge of these feelings in it on a skill level, and based on what's happening compared to what you want to happen, means that as the bones move, the proprioceptive feedback comes from the skin stretch, and also what we sort of lump it all together as joints feel. And then what happens is you use the muscular system to contract and then put you back on track, so muscles react. Now, some people have been picky and tried to pull this apart. The reality is, as you trigger some movement, the bones do move. As the bones move, skin and joints change, and so we say joints feel, but you could say the whole body feels. We can see bones, so we can see changes in angle at joints. That's why we talk about this. And then muscles react. That's the motor you've got to change this pattern, and so muscles must be the part of that solution. So the HMAC eyes, what you need to see really well with your HMAC eyes are bones. And so when we start to look at this motion, we'd say, well, can we describe the bones and all the components of the bones are going through one by one, and then can we then work out not only the order and the description, but then also how does that change the angle at the joint? And can we put a description to that? So changing angle of joint will also mean changing length of muscle. Now, when the muscle changes length, then there's a certain amount of power you add to the muscle through the stretch of the connective tissue, and then potentially, depending where you've come from and going to, put the muscle into an optimum place to contract or not. But the central nervous system says, we're not where we want to be, let's get that muscle reacting to put us where we want to be, or to control this motion. So we are where we want to be, but let's get ready to prime this motion to change a direction. So it's the muscle that will cause the change. And this is why people talk about lengthen to shorten to get a muscle to work. It's not strictly speaking true every time, but it is a good place to start. And so if you've got HMAC eyes, you might notice something happening that you didn't expect. So let's say the goal for our client here, as we watch them move, we said what we'd like to see you do is, as you move down, we'd like you to see you send that ball, and this time we're going to send the other way. We say we want to see it go to the left. Now, but what we were expecting was a further reach. So in this reach, what we wanted was almost the weight to go onto the opposite leg to the one it has. So here the weight's gone onto the right leg, but really we wanted more of a reach and the weight to go on the left leg. So we look at this motion and we say, well, you know, I don't expect the pelvis to travel this direction with the goal I've set. So my next goal is, can you get the ball as far as you can over to this point, even if that means you have to come up onto your toes to do that? And my HMAC eyes would tell me that's not what he's chosen. What he's chosen to do is put a lot of stress through this knee, which is neither good nor bad, but might not be what we want, and flatten through this foot, which is what we'd expect, but not perhaps what we want. Perhaps what we wanted was, on the descent, we wanted the descent to come through this leg, and so it was a slightly different movement. who knows what we wanted? What I'm saying is, if you know the HMAC, you can start to play. Now let's say if he started to squat down, you didn't see this knee bend, you didn't see the pelvis go that way, and that is what you wanted. Maybe then you look at the HMAC and the HMAC tells you, I didn't see the pelvis go to his right and I expected it to. I didn't see it anteriorly rotate and I expected it to. I didn't see it travel down and I expected to. I didn't see it tilt to the left and I expected it to. I didn't see it rotate to the left and I didn't see it travel backwards. And so because I didn't see these 6 things, or one of, then I'm going to change the motion until I see those, because that's what I want the bones to have done when I've set the goal that I've set. Now I want to tell you this because the HMAC is a very important part of what Faster does, and it gives you these eyes, and it's horrible hard to learn, but once you've learned it, it's one of the best things that you can have in your armour as a trainer. It's going to help you design exercises, it's going to help you build assessments, and it's going to make you as good as those guys who've naturally got these HMAC eyes. So what I suggest you do is have a look down in the description here if you're looking on YouTube, or have a look in the description up there if you're looking on Facebook. Go to my website, either sign up for the free course, or we have until the end of the month, we have opportunity to enroll on something called our FTE, which is how you teach people to do this. So you have to get really good first so you can then teach it, or have a look at our specialist in functional performance course. And our specialist in functional performance course, another phenomenal opportunity for you, because that's where we'll teach you to see all this. And there's a lot of practice goes in that. There's a lot of how do we predict this reaction, how do we drive this reaction, what is it that makes this work the way it does, well, how do we use it, can we use it, is it a performance technique, is it a skill development technique, how does it help me as a client predict fatigue kicking in, how as a client does it show me when a client, how does it help me work the client and show me when, you know, their brain's gone and they need a bit more help sort of getting away from the mental side of the movement, or they need help staying in the game as they as they go through stages of fatigue or stages of distraction. All that comes in, but your ability to have HMAC eyes is the most important thing you'll learn in this industry, in my opinion. It's number 1 ahead of the ability to research, but that will be number 2, so that you can then do something with the research to make this change and then see it. When people talk about art and science, really they're not. They're talking about science and science. But if ever there was a scenario you could talk about skill set and science, practical skill set is having the HMAC eyes, and then the science skill set is being able to find out what that means and how you're going to actually use that with your client. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video. I've tried to keep this at a level that's for people who are already trained as a trainer. I'm going to use this as one of my videos to show my guys on the FTE already. I'd love it if you got involved. You only get 1 chance a year. We run these in the UK, the US and Australia. The FTE really is going to be a place for you to show your skills. Thank you for listening, and I shall put some more of these out soon. Cheers.